Hi everybody, and welcome back to another Excel tutorial. In the last part, part 1 of a factorial, this one is a 2x2 factorial graph making tutorial. We did the bar graph of this 2x2 data. Here we have the means for sex differences on math skills, confidence building, and the DV here, the dependent variable, was statistics exam score, as you can see from this graph. So for part 2, what we're going to do is we are going to make a new graph, and this time it's going to be a line graph. So I'm going to go through the tutorial again as if we were not using data that we had already played with in the last part. So what I'm going to do with this one is, it's probably going to be a little shorter of a video, but with this one we are going to create the line graph, which many times you will see in a research methods book talking about factorials. So rather than bar graphs like this one, you'll see a line graph, even with a 2x2 two independent variable factorial design, because line graphs show interaction effects a little bit easier. It creates that nice quick visual cue to see whether or not there is an interaction in your data. So I went ahead and used this same workbook that I've been working in, and I went ahead and created just a new sheet. As opposed to scrolling up and down, I'm going to highlight all of this information, going to select it all, going to Control-C to copy it, or you can use the other available options to copy, and then I'm going to Sheet 2, and I'm just going to click someplace here, the C5 area, and I am going to put Control-V to paste it, or you can use the other options for pasting. And much like I did with the Sheet 1, I am going to double click on these columns to make them as big as they should be, so we get the full words, the autofill feature of Excel. Okay, so we have our means for male and in the math skills group, males in the confidence building group, females in the math skills group, and females in the confidence building group right here. And then these are their corresponding standard errors. And so we're still going to create a graph with these same numbers as we did for the bar graph. It's just going to be a different looking graph. And if you're familiar with factorials, let me go back to Sheet 1 here. If you're familiar with factorials and visual cues for interactions, you might see that this differing pattern here indicates that there is an interaction. And if you're familiar with the previous video, we know that we are looking for an interaction. The sex by group here is significant. So there is a significant interaction that we will be looking for. And so the line graph is just going to show that visually, very quickly. Okay, so in order to do the line graph, I'm going to highlight my means and labels, and I'm going to go up to Insert, over to the chart area, and the line graphs is found here with these like peaks and valleys, intersecting lines. It says Insert Line or Area Chart, so we're going to click on that. It'll bring the different kinds of charts up, and there are a few 2D lines that we are going to use down here. So there are 6 different lines that we're going to use, and so these first 3 don't have dots for the data points, and these last 3 have dots for the data points. So we're just going to choose the basic lines here where that there's quite a bit of a difference, but we're going to use the simple line with markers as opposed to just line. It's visual aesthetic, but line with markers is pretty helpful visually. Okay, so we click on that and it brings up our chart. Move that over and make it bigger. Okay, so everyone can see. So you see we have our lines. And very quickly you see that there is a crossover interaction because these two lines cross over. Sometimes called a disordinal interaction. This is what a line graph for a 2x2, even categorical 2x2 factorial is used for. Okay, quickly see that there is a crossover interaction. We're not going to go into the reasons and interpretation of that interaction because that's not what this tutorial is for, but it is there, and that's why you would use this chart. Okay, but we need to spruce up this chart, make it APA style. Okay, so the first thing we want to do, as in the other video in part 1, is get rid of this chart title. Delete that. Okay, so that was step 1. Get rid of the chart title box because we don't need a chart title. Figure captions handle explaining figures in an APA style manuscript. Okay. The next thing we want to do is get rid of these horizontal grid lines. Now I may be doing things out of order as in the previous part. I'm just handling it as we see them. Okay. So we're going to get rid of those grid lines. So we go up to Add Chart Element, click on that, and we go to Grid Lines, and we click on Primary Major Horizontal, which will get rid of those grid lines. And as you can see, hovering over, they are gone. So we click on that, and they're gone. Okay, so that the lines are just on a white background plot area. Okay. The next thing we're going to do is go to Add Chart Element and add our axis titles in. Oh, that's right. We want to switch our rows and columns. Again, this is an often unknown aspect to graph making in Excel. We can move math skills and confidence building to the actual lines themselves and move males and females to the x-axis. So we're just going to quickly do that. We click that once, and as you can see, move male and females to the x-axis. So these two dots here correspond to males, these two dots here correspond to females, and our two intervention groups are now represented by the lines. The interaction did not go away. Of course it wouldn't. Okay. The next thing, again, going back here to axis titles, we're going to add our primary horizontal. Do a number of clicking. That's not working. There we go. Highlighting it, deleting it, or backspace, and then adding the appropriate word or words that describes the two levels here on the x-axis. Okay, and we click away from that, click back to the chart, add chart element, axis titles, add primary vertical. And I think we wrote statistics exam score. Let me back that up. Score out of 100 in parentheses to indicate the scale, and then we're going to change the maximum value on this scale to represent that visually. Next thing we want to do is fix these axes. Okay, so oh, never mind. The next easy thing we're going to do is move this legend. Okay, in order to move a legend, we go to Legend under Add Chart Element, and we choose a standard position for one of these. As I mentioned in part 1, there's not a good idea to get rid of it because then people won't know what the lines represent. Left sort of looks awkward, but could be used. Okay, bottom is where we're at, but visually speaking, this makes all of this information a little too cluttered. We want to move the legend away from the labels on the x-axis, so the x-axis is all by itself down here at the bottom of the plot area. And so some standard places that you'll see it is to the right, because we don't want it at the left, because again that crowds the y-axis information, or the top. Okay, so the top or right. As with the bar graph, we put it at the top, and it compresses the plot area downward because it is its own text box. So we move the legend. Okay, now we can fix the axes. Okay, so I'm going to click here, double click on the x-axis, anywhere on the x-axis. Okay, you can see if you click anywhere within this box, it'll bring up the format axis options. Okay, and we don't need to change any visual aspect of the axes because again it's only 2 categories for a single independent variable, but we do want to make it a little bit more visible. So Excel defaults to this really faint gray color, and if you didn't have the labels there, you might not even see it. So we're going to make this contrast with the white background as much as possible, and so we're just going to color it solid black line. Okay, and it makes the change immediately, and so if I click away from the options, you can see that it is a solid black line. Now we're going to double click on the y-axis, anywhere on the y-axis. Again, if you click anywhere where the numbers are in the y-axis, it will bring up the format axis options for the y-axis. So instead of being in fill, I'll come back to the line in just a moment, but I do want to go to the axis options, okay, and we're going to click and expand the axis options submenu, and we're also going to click and expand the tick marks menu. Okay, let's first take on changing the numbers that are represented on the y-axis. So we know that the full range of possible scores on the statistics exam is 100, 0 to 100. Okay, so we have the minimum is 0, that's great, but Excel auto-generated 90 because we don't have scores that go too far above 80, or even close. We actually don't have scores above 80, and so it does one more major unit upward, which would be 90, but that's Excel using a computer algorithm. We know better, so we're going to change that to 100. We're going to hit enter, and it will make that change there. So we have 0 to 100 now. It compressed the scale itself, and so it made the dots a little bit closer on the lines. Okay, it doesn't really matter too much that it did that, because again we can always resize this as I did at the beginning of the video. Okay, we don't really need to do anything else in axis options because it all looks good. The major units of 10 units that are represented here, it looks fine to me. 0 to 100 by 10s is fine. We could add in the minor units, but of course it would add every single even unit, and it would get very cluttered. It'd be hard to read. The next thing that we want to do in this menu again is to utilize the tick marks. We don't actually have an axis. It's white, as you may have seen in the fill and line options. You can see that it is white. We don't want that. We want a contrast with the white plot area, and that is to make a coordinate plane with the x-axis. So we are going to focus on major type tick marks. And so we have 4 options. None, obviously we're going to change that. Inside, which is to the right of the axis line. Outside, which is to the left of the axis line. And cross, which is half inside, half outside. This is a personal preference on whichever one you want to use. I typically use outside as opposed to cross, and generally speaking, I rarely use inside because of how it looks. So just a visual choice here, we're going to go with outside. And because it conforms to the x-axis, it has to make tick marks, it changes the color of the line to be black. So we didn't actually have to go into the fill and line properties here in order to change that line from white to black. Okay, so here we have a solid black line, vertical line, that has tick marks for each of our major units. There we go. That looks pretty, doesn't it? The next visual thing we are going to do for the line graph is change the font size, and to make it a little bit bigger. It's going to reduce the plot area because it is constrained by the chart area, but again, we can resize that if we want. Just be aware that you do need to put this into a Word document in order to present it in a manuscript. So, you know, bigger or smaller, it's your choice. Okay, so let's go through and click on these various text options to increase the font size. So one of the places that I do it, which is by far the easiest thing that I've seen and have been doing for several years, is I just go to Home, where the basic formatting options are, and I'll just click on the boxes where the chart elements are. And a quick note on fonts. APA suggests using sans serif fonts. Sans serif fonts, excuse me. Because those are more readable at smaller font sizes and potentially longer distances. So Calibri, which is the Microsoft Office default, is a sans serif font, and it doesn't have serifs at the ends of letters. Okay, as opposed to a serif font like Times New Roman. Times New Roman would not be a suggested font for this APA graph that we're making. So we're going to leave it as Calibri. Another alternative is Arial. Arial is used, very blockish type letters. And then the other thing that APA suggests for these graphs is, along with readable font, make the size of the font more readable. So instead of font size 9, which is the default here, I'm just going to change it to 14. And so I click on 9 and I just do 14. You can also select 14 from the drop down menu, and when you hover over it, it changes the size. So obviously if I go all the way huge, it's taking away too much of the plot area. So 14 I think is a happy medium. Okay, and I can do that. For the remainder of these, I'm just going to enter in 14 with my cursor and the keyboard, and I'm going to hit enter to change them. Okay, so I'm going to go down here and click once on x-axis box, the label box, and I'm going to enter in 14, hit enter, that changes that. I'm going to click on the axis label box, that was a size 10, okay, I'm going to again change that to 14, now I have the label as 14, much bigger. I'm going to come over here to the y-axis, again click on 10, put 14 in, hit enter, and then finally, in the last bit of text here on the y-axis, the numerals, I'm going to put in 14 and then hit enter. There we go. we have a large graph. Still pretty sizable. The lines don't take up too much space on the white plot area, so it's not terrible. Now, the last thing I need to do is add in those error bars. Okay, so each of these dots is going to get an error bar. So an error bar for that blue dot, an error bar for that orange dot, an error bar for this female orange dot, and an error bar for this female blue dot. Very cool. So much like the bar graph, it's actually exactly the same as the bar graph in part 1. We are going to add in the error bars through the use of series. So Excel will read math skills as a series and confidence building as a series. And so we'll be adding 2 error bars at a time. Once, and then we'll do it a second time. Once for math skills, and then a second time for confidence building. And so how we do that is, with the chart selected, go back to design if you're not already there, and go to add chart element, down to error bars. Okay, it'll bring up the error bar options. Obviously none is our current selection. Then we have standard error, percentage, and standard deviation. We are not going to do standard error because Excel doesn't know our sample size information of our data points, those means that we have. We are not going to do percentages because, again, that's not helpful information in the error that we are trying to show regarding the means. And then we are not doing standard deviations. Again, Excel doesn't know our sample size information, and so it's extrapolating that information from algorithms that it does not have access. Well, it's doing algorithms that it has access to, but it's not from the data that we have access to. So we are going to go to more error bar options so we can customize the values. Okay, and so when we click on that, it brings up add error bars, this little selection box. Add error bars based on series. Okay, so math skills, like I said, and then confidence building. So we're going to click OK to do math skills first. And as you can see, it puts some random fixed value 10 unit error bars on there. Those are just default, not to worry about them at all. Okay, because we're about to change them. Some visual information options that we can change. The direction of the error bars. Both positive and negative direction, the negative direction and the positive direction. Both is generally acceptable, especially when you don't have a black error bar on a black bar. Minus and plus are useful in certain situations, so we're going to choose both. That's the default. We're going to keep that radio button on the default. And then the other visual option is end style, so this is with a cap or not a cap. Again, this is a personal choice. The default is with a cap, so we're gonna leave it as defaults. Finally, we enter the error amount, fixed value. Excel randomly generates this fixed value based on the y-axis scale. Percentage, again, this is not useful for us in this current situation. Standard deviations, again, not useful for us in this. And then standard error, you can't even select values. It uses its internal algorithms to make those, and then custom. This is what we want to use because we get to specify those values. And we already have those values here. So we're going to click on custom and specify value, and it's going to bring up the custom error bar box. I'm just going to move that as close as I can to my standard errors, and we're going to put the positive error value and the negative error value in by use of Excel formulas. So it already has the equals 1 for the positive value highlighted. So we are going to just easily go down math skills. Now, why did I choose D9 and D10? Well, those are the math skills standard errors. So we're adding an error bar for 70.13 and an error bar for 61.86. Those are the corresponding positive error values. Okay. Now, for the negative, we need to get rid of the default 1 there, equals 1. And we can do one of two things. We can highlight the positive error value formula from the sheet and put it there, or since we're in the negative error value box, we can use the crosshairs to select those cells, D9 and D10. Okay. Now that those values are in there, we can click OK. But before we do, I want to make a note that if there's anything wrong with these two formulas, Excel will tell you, and you'll have to fix them before you can click OK. But I don't expect there to be an error in what we're doing right here, so I'm going to go ahead and click OK, and there we have it. We have our two blue error bars, one on each side of the line. Okay. So that's math skills. Now let's finish this up by doing that same exact procedure for confidence building. I'm going to do that a little bit more quickly. So we go to Add Chart Element, Error Bars, More Error Bar Options. Oops, sorry, I need to click away from those two error bars because it's just going to think that I'm doing those same ones again. So we go Add Chart Element, apologies, Error Bars, More Error Bar Options. We go to Confidence Building to make those error bars, and we click OK. Again, it has the defaults up here, so both directions of the error bar, what end style we want, caps, and now we get to choose the error amount. So we go to Custom, click on Custom, Specify Value, and we're going to do the confidence building, which is E9 and E10. So that puts in the positive value because that was the equals 1 was already highlighted, so we can immediately replace it. Negative's not so easy. We can delete that, we can highlight it and delete it. We can do a number of things, and we can highlight those and put them in to the negative error value box, and then we click OK, and there we have it. We have click away, and there we have it. We have two of our confidence building error bars in there. And we can go ahead and close the Format Chart Area options, click away from chart, and there we have a nice looking line graph that shows what we already knew was an interaction between sex and intervention group. So this was part 2 of a 2x2 factorial graph making in Excel for APA style. Thank you for watching these two parts and making the graph in 2 ways. I appreciate you sticking around and learning how to use Excel to make nice graphs. Thanks for watching. Bye.